Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. In this edition of Status Rewind, we're going to look at massive protests that went on today in dangerous, smoky air in Washington, D.C., and then take a look back at our reporting in Virginia on the Mountain Valley Pipeline from 5 years ago at this point. That is still very relevant today. So obviously, if you live on the East Coast, you've been engulfed in smoke over the last few days from the California wildfires. I and many others have been wearing masks outside because it is dangerously smoky from those wildfires, and the wind has been taking it all the way down to New York City, now Pennsylvania, D.C., and it's supposed to go west now over the next few days throughout the Midwest. Today in D.C., it was a code purple. Let me repeat, code purple, meaning the highest level of air contamination. Let me read this from the Capitol Weather Gang. Has issued a code purple for D.C. area. The D.C. region has not previously recorded a code purple day for fine particle pollution. Code purple means air is unhealthy for all people. Limit the outside and or wear a mask. So in that code purple, you had what looks like hundreds of protesters that went out in front of the White House to demonstrate against the Mountain Valley Pipeline that was rammed through this debt ceiling deal as a result of President Manchin, that corrupt mofo, and the actual President Biden basically honoring a promise to President Manchin to give him the pipeline that he's been fighting for years as part of the debt ceiling deal. These protesters came out, even though this has now been included in the deal, because the activists against Mountain Valley Pipeline, and there has been tens of thousands of activists in West Virginia, and now all around the country that have been fighting this for years, that are going to continue fighting. And we'll show a little bit later some of our coverage on the ground from years ago. Let me show you just some of the demonstrations today. It included activists, local politicians. Rashida Tlaib spoke. Let's take a look at the first clip.
Mekudamin Chin Kiohe, Nahal Pipise, Mima Crystal, Mima Mevin, Wasiwa. So you see that sign that says Mani Inese, water is alive. That is how we say that in our language. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out here today and standing up for the MVP, or standing up to stop the MVP and stopping the MVP Southgate. Yeah. So I'm from North Carolina, and it's kind of crazy that we're hearing this wildfire haze. Humanity has reached a breaking point. Look around. It is fitting that we are now, that the earth is on fire. We are here. We will have to live with fire from now on. Because of Western colonization and taking away how people steward it, and I mean everybody, how we care for the lands now, we have lost control. Lala June Johnson once said, in an attempt to outsmart nature, we have outsmarted ourselves. We are nature. Passing the rollbacks on NEPA has set the course. Joe Biden, we are destroying the earth, and we are destroying ourselves. We have fought this pipeline for 10 years. We are not giving up. We are not giving up. The environmental injustices we are experiencing is now a battlefield in Congress, and we have to win this battle. I want you to say this after me. When we fight, we win. When we fight, we win. Say it with me now. Mani Inese. Mani Inese. Mani Inese. Thank you. I'm Dr. Crystal Cavalier, Okanichi Saponi.
So that was just one speaker, and there was a whole lot of speakers. Again, they came out on a code purple day. Code purple meaning the worst smoke in the air pollution on record, and the highest level that you can have. In New York yesterday, it was red, which is above the level 300. Purple is the worst it could be. It has never happened in DC. And these protesters came out against what they're calling the dirty deal in the worst air pollution you could see, which is why you saw a lot of them wearing masks. This is all over a extremely dangerous fracked gas pipeline that the media, shockingly, is not reporting accurately. This is not just any natural gas pipeline. This is an unprecedented pipeline. Let me just give you some of the details. I have the notes on my phone. A 42-inch, 1,400 PSI, that's the pressure, natural gas pipeline that is going in terrain on the Appalachian Trail that it's never been attempted to build a pipeline with this pressure of this size up the steepest slopes in the country. You're going to have many turns, twists. If it leaks, you could see it shooting up into the air. Not to mention, if and when it explodes, the blast radius is 2.5 miles. That's 2.5 miles up the steepest slopes in the country through thousands of waterways. And people live up these slopes and mountains and trails. People are going to die when it explodes, not to mention the water, the soil, the animals, and the methane that is going to be released. And it's not if it leaks, it's when it leaks. It's not if it explodes, it's when it explodes. There's no way, and this is not just me saying this, there is no way, experts say, to safely build this pipeline. Let's also listen to Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who also spoke at this rally, which looks like it had hundreds of people, even in this horrible, horrible smoke.
You know, the White House needs to understand this is not only a climate emergency and a climate crisis, but the fact of the matter is corruption needs to stop. Instead of the fossil fuel industry inside, right now, the White House drafting these bills, it should be the people of the United States. It should not be corporations that fueled with profit and corporate greed, because corporate greed is killing us every single day. You know, I grew up in Southwest Detroit where I thought it was normal. I thought it was normal that my friends had gotten asthma, respiratory issues. I thought it was normal that it smelled like that. I thought it was normal to have trucks rumbling by my park where we played or schools. It's not normal. It's not normal to play outside and come inside and smell like rotten eggs because of the hydrogen sulfide. It's not normal for us to have literally notices saying, you can't play outside today. It's too polluted. All I keep thinking about is all the children in my district right now having asthma attacks because of this. Because we're not moving with urgency. Because people are paying for access to the White House. They're paying to write these bills. Time is up. This is a crisis that is not going anywhere. It's just getting worse, and we need to move with the urgency that is needed. Because we have a right to breathe clean air, and we shouldn't have to beg the president or any administration to do something about it. We shouldn't have to get arrested to breathe clean air. We shouldn't have to sit there and push for the human dignity that we deserve. Enough. Enough.
Like what I hear, wish I heard a lot more of this from Rashida Tlaib, AOC, the squad, and actually played some hardball and took some political hostages like certain radical Tea Party Republicans do. Because she's saying all the right things, and credit to Congresswoman Tlaib, she's been pretty good on Julian Assange and freeing him as of late. But the bottom line is the proof will be in the pudding, which I'll get to in a little bit. But the fact that you had hundreds of people out there in some of the worst air pollution, really dangerous levels that have never happened in Washington, D.C., shows you that these people are not giving up just because Biden granted President Manchin ramming this extremely dangerous pipeline through the debt ceiling bill, which, by the way, if you don't know the history, Biden, to get President Manchin, and here is my President Manchin sticker, Manchin and the Parliamentarian 2024, you will, because to get Manchin's vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which obviously, you know, was billed as, oh, historic investments in the climate crisis. It was a bunch of tax incentives. It's a Band-Aid to a gaping climate inferno gunshot wound. But to get Manchin to vote for that, Biden promised that I'll give you the Mountain Valley Pipeline at some point. And that at some point came ramming the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which activists have been fighting for over a decade against, has been rejected for permits, has been tossed out of court and rejected through the courts. So activists have done what you're supposed to do. They have protested atop trees on their property. Some for years have protesting atop trees, chaining themselves to construction equipment. I interviewed a mother and daughter years ago in Virginia who protested atop their trees for over 30 days to stop the company from cutting down their trees to put the pipeline through their property on Bent Mountain in Virginia. But Biden is basically choosing to make parts of Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina a sacrifice zone. Because, hey, it's not going to affect donors in the Upper West Side of New York, Upper East Side of New York, donors in San Francisco, Napa Valley, LA, Beverly Hills, Chicago, DC. Not going to affect them. Let's take a little status rewind, which is our new series we're doing, where we look back through our on-the-ground reporting over the years. We've been around for 5 years now. I want to show you just some of the reporting I did on the ground in 2018 when a lot of these tree sits were going on. These were, again, where protesters are climbing atop their trees to stop the forest trees from being cut down to put this pipeline through parts of West Virginia and Virginia and the Appalachian Trail. Let's take a look.
This was a press conference with delegates from the House of Delegates in Virginia. You have folks from all over Virginia here in the audience. Obviously, Red Terry and Minor Terry, who were protesting at the top of their trees on their property in Bent Mountain for over a month so that they wouldn't cut down their trees. The oil company needed the trees cut down in order to survey the property and then put the pipeline through. So they stood up basically for over 30 days atop their treehouse.
State level, we're working as much as we can, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that the governor hears our concerns and continues to hear our concerns. But we're also fortunate that we're now having local elected officials and those that want to seek local office making this, the pipelines in Southwest, an issue in Northern Virginia, because all of us need to make this our own issue, because the entire Commonwealth is our backyard. So when you say not in my backyard, we're not talking about her backyard, we're talking about Commonwealth's backyard.
Your delegate, I missed your
Mark Keam, K-E-A-M.
Interesting to me about this is they keep going to the state. The state says do anything, but he was saying it's just simply not true. Do you think the state is kind of misguided or kind of just purposefully looking the other way?
Well, I'd say there are probably two ways of looking at this. One is the state's attorneys and others in that position are taking a more conservative view. That, I mean, obviously the language of the law is the same, it's black and white. But some people might say, well, just because we have the authority doesn't necessarily mean that we should use that authority fully because of precedent or history. If we're doing this now, then every time there's an issue like this, we have to get involved every single time. And do we want to set that precedent, right? So that might be one possible interpretation. And that's, in the policymaking world, that's a legitimate thing for people to say. The other interpretation is to say, well, regardless of what the state's authority is, we really don't have the clout to be able to do much other than what it is now. In other words, even if we did exactly what you want us to do under the code, under the language that we have, the end result is going to be the same anyway. Therefore, the federal government's rules or decisions are going to be the ones that are ultimately going to be standing. So why bother wasting our time as the state officials doing all this stuff when the end result isn't going to change? It's not only unprecedented, but it's something that is not necessary at all. So it's one thing to take massive risks if it's going to benefit thousands and thousands of people. But something that we know documented is not going to help Virginians because we already have several other pipelines in Virginia that's at half or less capacity. So they can easily fill that capacity before they build new ones. So the fact is, it's not only unnecessary and not economically feasible, but it really doesn't end in any kind of a public benefit. So it's not something that we should be doing.
When number 45 decided that he wanted these pipelines approved because the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is listed as one of his top 50 infrastructure priorities, he appointed 2 members to join Cheryl LaFleur, who's the only Democrat on FERC appointed by President Obama. Those 2 FERC members, new FERC members, immediately took a vote on both the Atlantic Coast and the Mountain Valley Pipeline to approve it. 98% of the pipeline proposals that go before FERC, not only are they approved, they're approved unanimously. But Cheryl LaFleur dissented, which is pretty close to unprecedented. And among the things she said in her dissent was that these pipelines serve no public good.
What are the things being burned for this pipeline in particular?
Well, what's being burned is methane, so you have to look at the infrastructure. So we talked a lot about pipelines today, but the process starts with the fracking in West Virginia and Pennsylvania predominantly, where they're putting chemical water, actually fracturing the rock to release the methane. The chemicals are the companies that are doing the fracking consider those chemicals that they're using proprietary trade secrets, so they don't even tell us what chemicals are, but they're polluting the water on the front end there. Methane leaks as part of that whole process. And then you have the rest of the project, which includes the pipelines, which also leak, sometimes explode. And then at the very end, the whole purpose of getting the methane out of the ground is to burn it to create electricity. So, and when you burn methane, it causes greenhouse gases. It's actually much more powerful than carbon dioxide.
I'm here with a mother and daughter who are just removed from over a month protesting on your property up in trees. You are protesting the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is, what do they call it, a natural gas pipeline that now they are trying to ram through the Appalachian Trail here, which is some of the most pristine land we have in the country.
They approached me 3.5 years ago, excuse me, and said, "We want to survey your land." And at first I went, "For what?" They said, "Well, we're looking for pipeline. We're going to put a pipeline." And no. But they came anyway. And we ran them off. And then the cops sided with them. We'd call the cops every time, and they would go, "Oh, well, they've got the right to be here." Well, I didn't give them the right. And the state police would run them off, or the landowner could run them off. And they came on my property, 2 years ago? And I was called. I had a kidney stone and left the doctors, and I couldn't hardly move. And my sister-in-law called and said, "Red, they're on your property. Get up here." I come up, and they have to park on the road, so they were up the road here and climbed up, and we're over in the top of my orchard. And I was actually climbing up the side of the mountain to go after them, and every time I got anywhere near them, the cops would say, "Oh, I need her back. Call her back. There's something important." And I'd come down, and they'd have nothing to say. I left 3 times, and they called me back 3 times. And it was for nothing. And then one of the main cops, whatever his name, Poindexter or whatever his name was, comes up to me after they start coming out of my property and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, there was a misunderstanding. I didn't realize you were the property owner." And everybody there went, "No, we introduced her. You knew exactly who she was." They needed to survey, and that's the only reason that was given to me. They had the right to survey our property. And because the Terrys still owned a great deal of property, they decided to go through every one of our properties. And it's gotten very, very ugly.
Can you kind of talk about all the things that are at risk, not just on your land, but from here to West Virginia?
It'll definitely affect the water. So the tree cutting the trees are the first barrier for soil erosion and for cleaning the water. So you remove those, you've already started a process you can't undo. And then when they start blasting to put this pipeline in, they want it 10 feet in the ground. And it's a 14 It's a 42-inch pipeline that they want in the ground. So blasting and digging and moving of all of that dirt is going to, you're going to have silt and erosion and everything like that. Even if they never cross a waterway, all of that will end up in the waters. But they are crossing waterways multiple times.
Yeah, the creek I was next to, they're crossing 23 times up here. And that is a Tier 3 waterway that leads right into Roanoke.
And it's not like these pipelines don't leak. You had in Pennsylvania a pipeline contaminated 15 wells just last year. And the pipeline company just got fined, which is nothing for them for this, but contaminated land there. What you were talking about, the sediment that goes in the water.
And even perfect case scenario, this pipeline never leaks. Just the damage they're going to do to put it in. We're on karst topography right now. It's a bunch of limestone caves behind me. The limestone filters the water. The minute they start blasting to do that, they'll probably ruin this well, my well, a lot of the water that people use and drink up here before they even put the pipeline in, and it's got the fracked natural gas running through it. And then after that, yes, they do leak. They do explode. And the newer ones do it more frequently than the older ones. And there's a company with a horrific track record. They're the ones putting it in. And they've never put it in such steep and dangerous terrain. They've got a terrible track record. And it's the largest pipeline they've ever put in. It's going to be awful. There's no way nothing cannot go wrong.
Right. And one of the FERC commissioners, again, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, I was a 2-to-1 vote basically to give them eminent domain. One of the FERC commissioners,
For an organization that's supposed to have 5 members.
So 2 seats are vacant. But one of the commissioners was pointing out they've never seen a pipeline on this scale in this kind of land, the steep terrain. Also, when you're talking about pipelines going under this kind of land, if there's an explosion, the blast radius could be potentially
2.5 miles.
Everything will be dead in 2.5 miles. And that's all but my son. And if he's visiting, that wipes us out. I mean, my sister-in-laws both live in town, and my brother-in-laws up here, some and some not. So that will wipe out the 7th generation of Terrys pretty much. 2.5 mile, that's all my friends, all my neighbors, and all my family gone. And the firefighters up here said, Red, there's nothing we can do. It'll take them a while to turn the gas off, so it'll be fueled by the gas. And he said, there's no way we can fight it on this steep terrain. And we had a lot of gypsy moth damage a few years ago. And if you look behind you, you see dead standing, just kindling for anything that happens. When we lost all the oaks and a lot of the apples to the gypsy moths, we had wildlife starving up here. Deers, their fawns, starving. So now they're going through and cutting the rest of my oaks, or a huge portion. Where I had her set, I had a very nice stand of oaks, and they took them all down.
The day after we came down, they just went through and cut. Both of our sets were located near waterways. Hers a larger portion of the creek, mine a tiny little babbling brook that literally comes out of the ground 1,000 feet from where I was sitting. And then just wetlands between the two of us. And they came through the day after and cut every single tree down between. There were no silt fences installed. There was nothing to mitigate the damage. Trees are laying in the creeks, which are not supposed to be. But she was saying when it explodes, it'll take a while for it to burn out. And that's because it's such a rural area that MVP has stated they're going to put a shutoff valve every 20 miles instead of every 3 miles like they would do in a more populated area. So when I've tried to educate people, they understand the facts. When they finally hear them. But to kind of drive the point home, I tell them that when this pipeline explodes, it'll probably be pieces of my house raining down on their house in Roanoke, and that this really is their backyard too. They should be invested and be interested and understand the issues at stake here. Not just, oh, it's not physically in my backyard that it's going through. It is. All of your water starts up here, your property values, your site views. People are coming to Roanoke and Virginia because of the lands. And so all those tourist dollars are going to start to dry up. If your water is damaged, nobody's is going to want to kayak and stand up paddleboard in the Roanoke River anymore.
So let's get to the tree sit. You guys were up there for 34 days?
She was up there one day longer than I was.
Okay. So how did this happen? Were you guys like on a Saturday night, like talking about this and like, you know what, we got to climb those trees? How did the idea come?
I think honestly, we'd probably kicked it around since we heard that they were going to actually try to put this pipeline, that it wasn't just talk, that when people came out and looked at this terrain and it didn't immediately scare them off, they're like, oh no, we can still do this. We're like, oh shit, they're going to put this in. And then the Peters Mountain tree sits came up and we're like, holy crap, people are actually doing this. Like, it can be done. It is slowing them down. It is stopping them. And it was 3 days to build the sits.
Actually, I took off and I told my boss, I said, I can't sleep. I can't think. I can't do this anymore. I have to do something. I said, I'm going in the trees. And I guess my daughter and my husband called my son and said, your mom's losing it and she's going into the trees. And my son was here. I took off Monday. My son was here Wednesday, where he took leave. And he and I went and bought some stuff to start building. And we walked all the Terry property in this section to find a tree that they could not extract us from without, you can bring in a ladder truck and take someone out, but you can't cross a swamp, 2 creeks, come down a steep embankment, have trees all in your way. That would be a little more hazardous. So, first thing we did was we walked the property to see where we could put them where they couldn't get us out. And then it was, let's get them up. And we had 3 tree sets. My son was in one up in the top of the orchard, and his was the highest and the shakiest. And he was 40 feet up. And they had kind of quit coming around. And
They being the Mountain Valley Pipeline surveyors or whoever they wanted to say they were, they're not required to tell us their name or who they work for or what they're doing here.
and they wore masks.
A lot of them
Which is
wear
against the law.
something to cover their face, a bandana, a mask.
I could attest to that because in the Dakota Access Pipeline, I was there 7 times. I mean, I was followed. My car was followed when I was working for the Young Turks. You see people that you don't know if they're in the mafia or ranchers. There's the pipeline company, then there's private security pipeline companies hire, and then there's some off the books type folks that they hire.
Yes, absolutely. And all of those tactics have been employed here too. They've definitely, VP and or global security have harassed citizens. They've followed them in their cars. There's been bully and scare tactics since they realized that the citizens aren't just going to roll over and let this happen. Mm-hmm. But I had a similar conversation with my boss that she did. I sat down in his office. I went, hypothetically, let's say I have to leave on really short notice for an unknown amount of time to live in a tree. Like, are you okay with that? And he's like, do you even like camping? No, I hate camping. I am a princess, but I don't feel that I have any other choice. gone through every other legal aspect of this. Not that what we did was illegal. It was a peaceful protest on our own property, but we've gone through the hearings and the meetings and giving them the information that they request. And when they say, oh, we did a bat survey and it was a one-night bat survey.
They said they
How
couldn't
much-
afford to spend any more time on that. Couldn't afford it.
And yet we're in a corridor of migratory endangered bats. It's just...
I'll tell you what they could afford. The parent company of EQT, Midstream Partners, parent company of Mountain Valley Pipeline, which is what they were protesting, gave then candidate Ralph Northam, he's now the governor, $50,000. Dominion Energy gave him $200,000. This pipeline, Mountain Valley Pipeline, will be crossing Atlantic Coast Pipeline. Dominion Energy is the largest partner in Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which is another dangerous pipeline. And EQT gave him $50,000. And I also don't have the exact number, but I understand the oil companies donated to his inauguration, Governor Ralph Northam. I'll get to Northam in a second, but I want to talk about sitting up in that tree. I mean, I just had back surgery, so obviously it would be terrible for me. But I mean, what were you running on? Adrenaline, the support from people that came. A lot of people came to camp out in support. How did you exercise up there? Like, what was it like being up there? Because there's got to be some times very cold, freezing nights. Fast forward to hot.
Super hot. For me, the people that came to visit and those that camped are literally the only thing. Well, 4 years of rage with this pipeline, but the people kept me going. I was 35 feet up in the air, and it's that in itself to be on a 4x8 sheet of plywood, and I couldn't use the whole thing based on the construction. I was essentially in a little TP-esque situation. Was remarkably isolating. And to have to shout down to my brother, who was my ground support, and the people that came to visit, or my boyfriend, or my father, or people that drove 4 hours, that is what kept me going. The schools that came to sing to me, or the musicians that played, or the people that drove 4 minutes or 4 hours to say thank you for what you were doing. We appreciate it. You're doing an amazing job. That's what kept me going for the days that it was rainy and I couldn't talk to anybody, or the days that it was cold or miserable, and knowing that I had armed cops under me all of the time watching everything that I did. I don't know what it was for you. We weren't able to speak a whole lot just because of my cell phone. I had 2 battery packs and I'd gone through them, and I'd dropped my solar charger. So that was a crushing blow. It was a very dark day at my sit. And then just to be cut off from everybody. Isolation is a remarkably strong torture tactic. So.
And you?
Mine was just pure love. Pure love for this mountain and my family and my neighbors and my friends. That kept me going.
I know that, probably a lot of it you don't remember because the whole experience was surreal, but did you ever have kind of those moments where you're just sitting up in that tree thinking, like, is this America? I have to sit up in my tree to stop them from destroying my land? Because you hear a lot of this conservative talk about, don't tread on me, and, you come on my land, I'm going to shoot you. And it just seems surreal that, a mother and a daughter, obviously you're close, would have to take these measures.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely was for me. There were multiple times thinking, like, I never envisioned this ever. But I know I've got some probably remarkably strong mental coping skills going on. I've pushed down a lot of the bad days, and they'll come back and bite me.
But I suffer, I think, from Tourette's, and they push all my right buttons, and they came in with their chainsaws and started cutting,
cannot tell you
And
anything that she told them.
Sergeant comes up with a bullhorn, and I've got people cutting my fucking trees. And he's yelling for me to come down. And I would not open my tarps for him. And he's yelling, and he's yelling, and he's yelling. And those chainsaw, and I hear my big trees dropping. And I throw open that tarp, and I say, fucker. You are the Roanoke County Police, and you are supposed to protect your Roanoke County citizens. You're not supposed to be sucking MVP's dicks. And I said, when did this happen? And he looks up at me, and I said, and I think you still got some on your chin. So go fuck yourself and get out of here. I'm not coming down. And evidently they didn't think a 61-year-old woman
Had the tenacity to do that.
was supposed to say that kind of shit
Also
while they
that.
were taking out her forest. You know, I had to cut my trees for the gypsy moths. The guy was related to us that did the timber, and he took great care in what he did. And he told me, if we can cut them before they die, you'll have your hardwood forest back in 100 years. But if they die, it'll take you 200 years to get a hardwood forest back. It takes an oak tree 22 years to develop an acorn. So I'm sitting up there watching him cut all my trees, thinking, I won't see it again. Yeah, I got ugly. A few times.
Yeah.
I also understand that they cut an apple orchard that was like 150 years old.
My apple trees. I had pippins were the big thing up here, and a lot of my trees have died. Gypsy moth like apples too. And at the top of the orchard, I had a couple of pippins still producing, and I had a huge Rome. I'm calling it a Rome. One of my neighbors said that's probably what it was. It was probably as big as that little oak in front of the pine. The tree produced beautifully, and I'd snack on the apples occasionally, but mainly the bear, the deer, the raccoons, every animal up here. Just you could see where they'd come through and eat on them. And yeah, I wasn't making a living from them, but they meant a lot to me. And they marked them all. I've been up there. I can't go up there right now.
Yeah,
But they cut them all
behind
down.
us.
And yeah. Massey made the comment at one of the court hearings
MVP's
that, well, everybody has a favorite tree. That's not going to stop us. And then I have an oak tree out here in the back. It's a scarlet oak. Was a scarlet oak. That when it was coming up, I thought, what a wonderful place for an oak, because it was kind of in the corner of the field and had room to grow, and I thought that'll be nice. So when it was about this big, I marked it so I wouldn't bush hog it. And it started producing acorns a couple years ago. And it looks like one of the pictures you see of the single tree that's just absolutely gorgeous. Well, that was in their path too. Her little tree house she built while we were cutting wood, that was in her path too, in an oak.
That's where I lost it.
Yeah, that was in a nice oak, but they don't care. People have favorite trees. Why shouldn't they make profit just because we have favorite trees?
As always, we were basically the only mainstream and independent outlet actually out there covering this battle, covering this fight, which is not sexy, which involves environmentalism, which involves corporate greed. And basically, these fossil fuel companies are the equivalent of the mafia in terms of the power they have, the threats they pose, and how they buy off politicians, because Virginia is basically owned by Dominion Energy and other fossil fuckers. But I think what's important, and this is bigger than just the Mountain Valley Pipeline, it's great to see folks out there protesting in front of the White House, on a really dangerous, polluted day. It's great to see people out there protesting still for health care, for on immigration and many other things. But at a certain point, protest is futile if we are not doing more than just showing up for a day or two. Folks, we need to add economic threats to our boots on the ground. Let me repeat. We need to add economic threats to our boots on the ground. That involves organizing economic boycotts, from everything against big banking to local banking to the local exploitive grocery store to Amazon. I don't care what it is. You name it. Big box stores, all the way down to your local movie theater. Sure, you could say, well, Jordan, that's going to hurt the economy, or that might hurt innocent people. Well, it's kind of the climate or short-term pain. And as part of economic boycotts, you could also have mutual aid and strike funds, because this is basically a strike when you're withholding your money. But organizers need to not just organize 1 or 2 day protests, but organize local economic boycotts and build on that. Imagine if Occupy Wall Street over a decade ago had an economic component to it, where people on the ground in Zuccotti Park were aided and supported by people choosing not to spend their money strategically at some of the most important companies and industries in the country. They will listen if you affect their quarterly profits. They will listen if you affect their ability to do stock buybacks. When I say they, I'm talking about the United Corporations of America right behind me, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Bank of Americas, the JP Morgan Chase, the Home Depots, et cetera, Disney. I would like to see more protests like this, but actual economic threats. You say, Jordan, how do we do it? I don't have all the answers, but what I do know, I've been covering boots on the ground protests on Black Lives Matter, on the climate crisis, on immigration, LGBTQ rights, et cetera. Minimum wage, the list goes on for years. At a certain point, we got to stop marching around the same blocks, marching in front of the White House, chanting the same things without a threat attached. If you're with me, let me know what you think in the comments. And also on Mountain Valley Pipeline, go to our playlists and find Mountain Valley Pipeline. Go through some of our on-the-ground reporting. Again, we were some of the only independent journalists out there covering this back in 2018, and we might have to go back. We are only able to cover this in 2018 and now on the ground because of you. So if you're not yet a Status Coup member, sign up, statuscoup.com/join.